Good afternoon, everyone. House Taxation Committee will come to order, please. First item of business today will be bill introductions. Do we have any bill introductions? Yes. I'd like to recognize Matt Hickam, Hickam Public Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Matt Hickam with Hickam Public Affairs. I'm speaking on behalf of my client, Amazon. I have a bill introduction regarding taxation and marketplace facilitators. The RS number is 21RS0565.
Thank you, Mr. Hickam. Committee, any questions? Representative Hyland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is that for or against?
It is for.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions, committee? Seeing none and seeing none on the virtual world, any objections to the introduction of the bill? Seeing none, the bill is introduced. Thank you, sir. Committee, any further bill introductions? Pardon my technical difficulties here. Seeing no further bill introductions, we will conclude that portion. And at this point, committee, we have before us Senate Bill 13. I would like to open up the hearing for Senate Bill 13, and I would look to our lead reviser, Adam Siebers, for a brief overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 13 essentially takes care of 4 items. It institutes a new notice and hearing process for when property taxes would be raised for budgets. It discontinues the current tax lid. It deals with valuations of real property and also allows for a payment plan. Those are the broad overviews. I'll go through them in a little more detail here. Section 1, essentially what it does is sets a new process for governing body, and they're going to do increase property tax payments to cover budgets. It does so by establishing what is referred to as a revenue neutral rate, which is defined as the tax rate for the current year that would generate the same property tax revenue levied for the previous year using the current year's total assessed valuation. Essentially what it does is it takes last year's budget for the property tax, the money raised from property taxes, and moves that forward to the current year. And if the body, the local entity wants to increase beyond that amount, it has to go through a notice and hearing procedure laid out in the statute. And a part of it, they have to have an open meeting where they approve the increased amount. And then secondly, they have to issue a notice. Each government body would issue, or there'd be one combined notice that each government body would put certain information on. There's a whole string of information dealing with the amount of tax, the amount of revenue neutral rate for their parcel that have to be included on this notice. Additionally, the costs associated with the printing and postage of the notice will be shared by the taxing subdivisions. And then, like I said, lastly, there would have to be a public hearing with a majority vote for adopt the resolution for the increased budget. Lastly, if the government body fails to comply with the notice and hearing procedures, the governing bodies are required to refund any taxes collected above the revenue neutral rate. School districts, this is kind of a newer provision from bills seen in prior years. School districts are exempt from these, or school districts were exempt last year. However, the county clerk shall include in the notices tax information about the school districts on the notice. Additionally, for the state, that would also include the mill levy rate of the state and the tax that would be imposed on those parcels. They're not really held to this. They're not in the same category where they have to issue the notice, but that information will be on the notice. Those are kind of new provisions from prior bill drafts. Again, these provisions would also take effect January 1 of 2021, so the current year. Section 2 of the bill would provide that if for valuations of real property would not be increased as a result of normal repair, replacement, or maintenance of existing structures, equipment, or improvements on the property. The bill defines what these items are, and this amendment would take effect July 1, 2021. Lastly, the bill would allow for county treasurers to establish a payment plan for delinquent or non-delinquent property taxes. That bill's been, prior versions of the bill, and this provision have been discussed previously. And then lastly, the corollary, the current city and county tax lid would be discontinued starting this year. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sievers. Committee, any questions? Representative Hyland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On your Section 5, your review, which we received, you state that the current city and county tax lid will discontinue. Where is that in the actual bill, please?
One second. It is 792925C, I believe, which is.
I believe it's Section 6 where that is repealed.
It is on actually Section 5. Sorry. Basically, all the section does that discontinue. We just insert in the prior to January 1, so it puts a back end date of what that provision would be in effect for. So going forward after January 1, 2021, that whole statutory section would have no effect.
Section 5, line 24, then, is where that's stated in there?
That's correct.
Committee, any further questions for the reviser? Seeing none, thank you, Adam. Stay tight, we might need you later too. Thank you. Committee, I would like to turn your attention to the fiscal note that is included in your bill. There is a fairly extensive fiscal note as far as verbiage. There's no fiscal impact on the state general fund that is noted, so I would encourage you to read through that. We will not have Department of Revenue opine on that since there is little impact to the state general fund. So at this time, committee, I would like to open up our proponent section of the testimony, and to start us off, I would like to invite the Honorable Senator Karen Tyson, Chairwoman of the Senate Assessment and Taxation Committee. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, and Ranking, and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. It's nice to see so many friendly faces. I'll come over here more often. This is not the first time you guys have seen this legislation. The reviser went over what's in the bill, 4 major parts. 2 of the parts came to us as a result of much work. It was not developed in a vacuum by any means. In fact, I listed out Representative Corbett, Representative Hyland, and others. We met with stakeholders across the state. We took a different process for this. This was, usually we write legislation in certain ways and do certain parameters. But as a software engineer, we took a different approach to this. We treated it as a project. Everything was on the table, from no property tax ever, to electing appraisers. Just every single item was on the table. We met one of our final meetings, and we did a weighted matrix. And these are the 2 top items that came to the top of the list in that matrix. And it's the transparency portion and the portion where if you're doing normal maintenance on your home, you do not have to worry about a valuation increase because of that normal maintenance. The third part of the bill, we have to thank Representative Kelly. We appreciate his efforts and his idea, and so we took it and put it in this bill to allow county treasurers the option to set up a payment plan for their property tax. We think that's really good. And then the other portion came to us as a result of testimony last year and hearing our local county and city governments complain, local taxpayers complain about the property tax lid. It wasn't working. It's not working. We've seen automatic increases, usually almost up to the CPI index. I had one treasurer out west tell me that we forced a tax increase so that they could avoid going to the vote. They always increase to the maximum. So let's just get rid of the lid and have some common sense here. This is legislation. It may be new to Kansas, and it is a big change, so it is stretching your comfort zone. But this legislation has been in place for over 30 years in Utah and almost 40 years in Tennessee. We didn't reinvent the wheel. We took good products, and we are applying it to Kansas. I could go into more detail, Mr. Chairman, but that's the crux of it, and I would stand for questions. I would like to give a couple of comments, though, of items I've heard, if I may, real quickly. They said that this is not an all or nothing. When the locals vote on the revenue neutral rate, they are voting whether to accept a tax increase or not. But their budget is where they actually decide the amount. They don't have to take the maximum revenue neutral rate. They can that is the maximum that they can go to. They can definitely go below that rate but they have to accept an increase before they can do that. So it does allow the locals to do their budget and plan. They may vote on the increase, and then they may come in lower than than the maximum amount that they asked for. The other item is the dates. We keep hearing, of course, different groups, different entities, the city council or the city, your mayors have a different idea than your clerks or different governing bodies. And so what we did, we were very diligent on this. We've looked at it 3 times this summer too to make sure that we had the dates, and we took them out of statute. We took current existing statute, and we talked to stakeholders throughout the state, and that's how we came up with those dates. The other item that you'll hear about is, we don't allow for new construction, and Utah does. Well, Utah allows for new construction growth, an automatic increase. However, they have a cap. They have a maximum amount that you can increase. Even with the revenue neutral rate, there is a cap. We are completely removing the cap. There is no lid, no nothing. So we're just saying, please be transparent with all increases, including new construction. Just tell your constituents, why do we need the increase? Well, we've got some new roads, we've got some law enforcement issues that we need to take care of. Whatever it may be, just be transparent. That's all we're asking for.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr.
Chair. We will go ahead and take questions of the senator to respect her time if she needs to go to another meeting. So we will try to group the proponents together and the opponents and neutral testimony. However, for the senator, I would like to go ahead and open it up for questions. And first, I had Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator. A couple questions for you, and I appreciate it seeing the payment plan in there. But one, I know you said there were talk about dates. The only complaint at all that I had from my county clerk was the 2021 start date.
The start date, yes. I was talking to a county commissioner about the start date on it. First off, if it wouldn't have been vetoed by the governor last year, taxpayer-funded lobbyists asking for it, then we wouldn't even be here. The date wouldn't be an issue. But the thing that I told, once I talked to this commissioner and explained to him, you don't have to increase taxes this year. You can just take the same amount of money that you got last year, a revenue neutral rate, no increase, and then there's no worry about the timeline on the implementation. He said, you mean I can have 2, 3 years? I said, absolutely. That's the logistics of it. If we delay this a year, then we will be setting ourselves up for the same scenario that happened with the property tax lid. And I don't know if you remember, I'm sure somebody will have the numbers, but statewide, we saw property taxes increase as a result of they were rushing to get an increase before that lid went into effect. And so if we don't put this in this year, we're going to see another increase. Like this year, for example, we've got some counties, we're going to see, I think on average, it's about a 4 to 5% property tax increase, and that's with a CPI index lid. So it's not working. They're finding all the exclusions that are in there, and we're going to see that again this year. Our constituents are struggling. One of the biggest things we hear about is property taxes, especially with the unemployment, the layoffs, the businesses shutting down. I've got businesses that are completely obligated to still pay their taxes when they weren't even allowed to operate. It makes no sense. And this doesn't lower property taxes. I don't want anybody to have the impression that this lowers your property taxes. It does not. It makes, what happens now is the valuations fluctuate, go up or down, and if they go up, and I had a commissioner meeting, it's nice, all the stuff's online, you can listen. I was listening to a commissioner's meeting, and they literally said, well, we're not going to have to raise the mill levy. In fact, we can lower the mill levy because we're going to bring in more money because the valuations went up. So they're going to go home and tell their taxpayers that they didn't raise property taxes, but the taxpayer knows they're writing a bigger check. The taxes went up, so why did those taxes increase? That's what we're trying to make transparent here. Why did property taxes go up?
Yeah, the one thing that I would have a concern about is in this year with all the COVID, I mean, our courthouse has had several complete shutdowns because of quarantine and whether that creates a problem. Last year in the House Tax Committee, we did pass as a committee a delay until 2022. So there was some sentiment on the House side to do that. And then I'll ask you the second question to not belabor it too. Did you give any consideration at all to alternative forms of notice? I mean, you could do a postcard, you could do a letter, you could choose an option of like an email to lower, give the opportunity to lower cost and save tax that way.
Yes, Representative, we did give that consideration. Again, as I said, we've modeled this after Tennessee, Utah. I brought samples. It's included with my testimony. If anybody would like it, this is a notice that goes out, a letter that goes out in Utah. It's that simple. We're not making this complicated. I had somebody in my office a few minutes ago that said, well, I want to see X, Y, and Z on this. This is the minimum ask, what is in the bill. The locals can add more to it if they want to. It's the minimum, again. So, yes, it was considered. In fact, the good chairman and I had a great conversation on possibly at some date making these electronic. And there is an option in the bill that if both parties agree, then they can make it an email, electronic. And so, yes, it has been considered. As far as implementation goes, I will propose this to the committee. I've asked counties to give me a price on implementation. I know they've seen CARES money, they've seen more money coming in with sales tax, some of them, so it may not be an issue, but I was told there's over 60 counties that use the same software system. Let's get the estimate then and see what we can do in the budget. It would be a line item for 1 year. This is not, and again, just don't increase taxes for this year. Really, how difficult is that? 1 year to give our taxpayers a reprieve in order to implement this. It just makes sense to me, common sense.
Next on the list is Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator. I've sat next to the senator all through the fall when we were on the interim for economic recovery together, and I think you've been working really hard on this legislation. I think that, we can all find some pieces in it that we like, but I have been getting a lot of emails from people from the library systems, and to me, a library is not just a place to get books, it's also an employment lifeline for a lot of people. It's an education lifeline because this offers internet service to people and allows them to function. Have you looked at a way, like a possible carve out for them? Because I see a major economic value for our libraries, and frankly, I spent most of my high school in libraries because, I'm that kid. So honestly, is there anything that we can do to find a compromise in regards to that?
I'm a great supporter of our libraries. In fact, I think the Topeka Library, we looked at this a year or two ago, I think the property tax on that is approximately $14 million. So I think the taxpayers would want to know that it might be a $14 million budget. I'm not sure what they're getting with the property tax, but taxpayers need to know where this is going, and we're asking for transparency. We have over 4,000 taxing authorities in the state of Kansas. 4,000. So the idea is not to exclude. The idea is to include everybody in this notice. And with the schools K through 12, the Gannon lawsuit, we weren't able to tackle that mountain at this time, but what we were able to do is put them as part of the notice. So any notice goes out, that information will be on there. And also the 1.5 state mill levy that the state collects will also be on the notice too. So people can see what happens if the valuations are going up. There's going to be an automatic dollar increase.
Thank you. And just one quick suggestion. I know that you mentioned that, let's not raise taxes for a year to give businesses a break. Just because of the economic value of libraries and how important they are to education, especially when we don't have kids in school, if we could even consider giving them a year's reprieve, and I'd be happy to work with you on that. We'll see what happens when we work the bill. Thank you so much for all of your work, Senator. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator and Chairwoman, for being here today. Thank you for your testimony. I just pulled up the governor's veto message, and you mentioned that the veto came at the request of a taxpayer-funded lobbyist. I must have missed that in the veto statement. Do you happen to know what time of the sine die session the House began debate on this bill? It was the CCR for House Bill 2702.
The House and the Senate both debated the bill May 21st, and I was told there were several people in the room when the governor decided to veto it, and one of the people in the room told me that a taxpayer-funded lobbyist had asked her. Of course, her public position was that she didn't want to put the burden on the local governments. I understand that, but I'm going to ask the governor, and I'm going to ask this committee. I'm very thankful that the Senate did pass it 34-1, but I'm asking that you consider the taxpayers, the people out there that are struggling, trying to make ends meet. We are literally, not figuratively anymore, literally taxing people out of their homes. I have a veteran that called me from Johnson County, Miami County area. He has to sell his property now because he cannot afford to pay his property tax. It is an issue in Kansas. We go door to door and we hear from individuals. They don't know whether to pay their property tax, to buy their medicine, or to buy their food. This is a major issue. Again, it won't lower it, but it does create transparency, and that's what we need.
Thank you, Senator. And to correct the record, the House began debate on this at 12:43 in the morning on May 22nd, after the expiration of the 2020 legislature, and passed it at 1:04 a.m. And I believe that was part of the constitutional questions about whether or not the bill had standing. So thank you.
Thank you. That would be great, Mr. Chairman, if the governor would not veto it, because we're debating it in the light of day now. So thank you.
We have time, committee, for one more question for the senator. Representative Corbett.
Thank you. As far as the libraries, like in Shawnee County, they have their own tax authority, and it's pretty good. They do a good job of taxing. The thing that frustrates me about this committee and these people, they like to kick the can another year. The taxpayer has been beat to death. People are leaving this state. We're number 6 for Exodus. You got to give these people a reason to stay here, whether you're a retiree or a family guy or starting a business. We don't get something started here, it's just going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. So I applaud your efforts. We just got to get it done as fast as we can. Is what I'm looking for.
Thank you. If I may, Mr. Chairman. This is definitely a team effort. This is not one person. You guys know that. I'm hoping that you'll join the team and help support us in this effort. The issue that we've got is, again, I will reiterate the taxpayers. We just need to simplify the process, bring transparency to the process, and work with our local governments on how we're funding them. We really need to ask that question. You guys may not be aware of this. We pay more in property tax. We pay more in property tax than we pay in sales tax or in income tax. So we have to ask ourselves, how are we funding local governments? What's the best? And I think our chairman will be able to help us in that respect better than anyone in this room, because he's got a really good perspective. And so this is a handshaking. We don't want to pull the rug out from underneath them. There was a building in a hearing we had this summer, a building that was valued at $1 million in Iola, Kansas. $1 million. And the property tax was approximately $52,000 a year. In less than 20 years, they're going to pay for that building in property tax. A similar building, $1 million in Utah, $16,000 a year. I know there's a restaurant here on Wanamaker, $62,000 a year in property tax. He says he's got to flip a lot of pancakes to pay that property tax. He's right. So let's just think about the process. How can we improve the process? We're not pointing fingers anywhere. We're just trying to get the best possible process and make it transparent so that and the one thing that this bill does do, taxpayers are allowed to participate in the process before their property taxes increase. Currently, they get a valuation notice. Most of them may or may not comprehend what that means. It may or may not mean an increase, depending on what the local government does. But this notice, they will know, and they will be able to participate before their property taxes increase. So I appreciate you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee, for listening and your consideration. I hope you stand with us in support of the bill.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Next on our list is we would like to welcome to committee Lynn Jenkins on behalf of the Kansas Health and Fitness Association. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Mason, Minority Member Gardner, and honorable members of the committee. It is my pleasure to be here this afternoon. I am Lynn Jenkins, and I'm here on behalf of the Kansas Health and Fitness Association, who represent private sector tax-paying health clubs in Kansas. Joining me to answer questions from you all is Greg Ferris with the association. Our health clubs are in a unique situation here in Kansas. These facilities fully expect a competitive industry, and they spend every day adapting and growing to stay one step ahead of their competition. However, increasingly, their competition is not other private sector clubs, but nonprofit and government-owned health clubs who pay no taxes at all. This is the only industry in Kansas that I'm aware of where a significant component of their competition pays absolutely no sales tax, no income tax, and no property tax. These nonprofit clubs and government-owned facilities have a value of over $300 million and growing. Local government-operated health clubs specifically have spent over $100 million in the last 15 years on new facilities, forcing nearby private sector competition out of business due to an unlevel playing field. The irony is that through mill levies flowing to recreation commissions, school districts, and other government entities, struggling tax-paying clubs are forced to pay to build and fund their competition. In addition, if there are shortfalls in those operations, additional tax money flows to fund the ongoing operation of government facilities. So not only do their competitors pay no taxes, they are funded by taxes paid by KHFA eligible members. As with many problems, this disparity was further exacerbated by COVID-19. Health clubs were forced to close for nearly 2 months last year and continue to deal with significantly reduced capacity upon reopening. During the closure period, nonprofit and government-funded clubs were able to turn off the lights, lay off employees, and have minimal ongoing expenses. Tax-paying clubs, however, still had property taxes accruing during the shutdown. Therefore, I'm here today to speak in support of an amendment to Senate Bill 13 that would give the same property tax treatment to all Kansas health clubs. This amendment would not include any sales or income tax exemptions, which for-profit clubs would continue to pay, and it has no impact on nonprofit clubs. As a former legislator, I fully recognize the importance of protecting the tax base. However, the failure to adopt this amendment actually poses a greater threat to the tax base than its adoption. Over the past 2 decades, while nonprofit and government health clubs began their aggressive expansion, over 150 tax-paying clubs have closed. Since members of for-profit health clubs pay sales tax every time a club closes and members go to non-tax-paying facilities, the tax base shrinks. The state loses approximately $35 per year in sales tax from every member that goes from a tax-paying club to one that does not pay tax. That costs the state over $5 million and growing every year. I want to thank the committee again for your time this afternoon and urge adoption of this amendment to remove the unfair tax treatment between competitors and pass Senate Bill 13 as amended. Thank you, and with that, Mr. Ferris and I would be happy to stand for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And committee, I would remind you, we will try to take questions at the end of the proponents section if you're willing to stick around. Next committee would like to welcome to House Taxation Committee, Dave Trobert, representing the Kansas Policy Institute. Mr. Trobert, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Dave Trobert, Kansas Policy Institute. It's my pleasure to be here again, testifying in support of Senate Bill 13. Many of the same reasons we had last year in testifying in support. I want to talk about 2 things here. I want to remind you of the impact of why taxpayers are so furious with not having government be honest with them. Property tax for cities, counties, and other local units of government jumped 180% between 1997 and 2019. That's more than 3 times the rate of inflation. But local officials often say, we're holding the line. I'll give you a couple of examples. Douglas County's budget book this year says, quote, acknowledging that COVID-19 has had a significant economic impact for many, the mill levy remains flat. We're standing up for the taxpayer, except the budget shows a 4.8% property tax. If you go through it, you'll find it. They are not being honest. The Johnson County budget touts a small reduction in the mill rate, but if you go through the 445-page document, you'll find a 4.3% property tax increase. We're dealing with inflation, and these 4% range, that's about the average. We surveyed the 50 largest cities and counties, and it's right around 4%, which is right around 4 times the rate of inflation. I mean, Overland Park, I wonder how many councilmen in Overland Park told their constituents, we're raising your property tax 8.8% this year. Or in Lenexa, 8.3%. No, they're saying we're holding the line. And this is what it comes down to, ladies and gentlemen. They do not want to be honest. That is the real objection. They don't want to be honest. I'll talk about a few of the objections here, and just to give our feedback on it. When it came up earlier, it needs to be delayed a year. Well, in addition to what Senator Tyson said about it would not have to be delayed a year, these things can be done if they want. This is saying, once again, to the taxpayer, you need to give us a break. When has local government given the taxpayer a break? They'll say, well, we shouldn't have to vote on construction, new construction, or we shouldn't have to vote on inflationary increases. First of all, why the heck should they not be honest? I challenge anyone to give me an honest answer of why local government should not just be honest about the property tax increase. By the way, on inflation, we taxpayers don't get our taxes adjusted downward for inflation. We don't get that break, but government wants the break for themselves. They'll say it's too expensive. It's going to cost too much. And yet, so many local governments proudly say that they have to raise taxes often because they want to provide the services that people demand. Let me assure you, people demand honesty from local government, and they want it now. They don't want it next year. They want it now. The real reason here is that they just don't want to be honest. And here's why. This came out in testimony last year, and it might come up today. One after another, we had local government people come in and basically say, the taxpayers just aren't smart enough to know what needs to be done. We know better, and we can't be bothered telling them what we don't want to make our case. Just trust us, we know what's better. Taxpayers are fed up with this. They want honesty in taxation. That's what this is all about. Just ask yourselves, why should anyone not have to be honest about the tax increase they're imposing? With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll close and be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Traubert. Next, we'd like to welcome to committee via WebEx Eric Stafford with the Kansas Chamber. Eric, can you hear us?
I can. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
All right. Well, thank you. Good to be here virtually. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today in support of Senate Bill 13. My name is Eric Stafford, Vice President of Government Affairs with the Kansas Chamber. We supported this policy last year and would hope that you would this year after it just passed the Senate with a wide margin. When we found out that Senator Tyson was working on this, the timing was in the fall of 2019. We had commissioned in the spring of 2019 the Tax Foundation to do a comprehensive review of tax policy in the state. And so the Tax Foundation went across the state, met with our members, met with various legislative stakeholders, leadership, other organizations or trade associations, public sector and private sector, and just to get the whole feel of the state of taxes in Kansas. Obviously coming off of 2012 to 2017, they knew that that was fresh in everybody's minds, but they looked at sales tax, income tax, corporate income tax, and property taxes. When I got the first draft of our report that they put together for us, I saw this Utah Truth in Taxation model as a suggestion, as an alternative to the tax lid that is, to say controversial is an understatement. The local governments don't like it. They continue to push for exemptions for items that the private sector has to pay for on top of our property tax burden. It's clear that the intentions of the property tax lid or public vote requirement were not meeting with the realistic application from local governments. As Senator Tyson mentioned, we saw a spike from local governments initially raising valuation accepting that money to bring in advance of the effective date of the tax lid. We saw too many exemptions put in place initially to try to compromise and get something done after it passed, and it just wasn't working. So when we got a phone call from Senator Tyson following up with her work group that had been looking at taxes. We hadn't been participating in that, but she clearly had a lot of stakeholders involved from all aspects. They did their due diligence. There's some more bills that passed last year that came out from that group and their expertise. And this was one of them. And when we learned about it and really started to understand what happened through the process last year, they had representatives from the state of Utah who came in to testify. This had been in place for more than 30 years in Utah. It's working effectively. We started digging into local government websites to see what they were saying about it. The narrative on their websites is more of a collaboration between local government and the taxpayers. Here in Kansas, I think there's a perception and the feeling that, we're not raising taxes. Some of the other proponents have talked about this. We're not raising taxes. We're keeping your tax rates flat, but yet the tax bills go up. We've seen that. It's especially impacted on the commercial side, where our properties are taxed at 25% valuation versus 11.5% on the residential side. So we're already dealing with a higher tax burden just because of the type of property that we're dealing with in terms of the classification within the state. You'll see in our written testimony some comments or data from our annual CEO poll. We ask business owners, would you rather see income tax, property tax, sales tax increase, decrease, or stay the same? Are they too high? And property tax by far is the most despised. That number was at 60% would like to see a decrease in their property tax burden. That number was 70% last year. So, but it's typically 60, 70% in our survey results. There's a lot of animosity in the business community dealing with property taxes. So ultimately, there is a strong partnership, I think, from just the messaging on the Utah side of things, encouraging taxpayers, attending those hearings. I think that's imperative, allowing taxpayers the opportunity to voice their frustrations or comments or concerns leading up to the vote for the Truth in Taxation for the Truth in Taxation hearing. The process seems to be working well in the state of Utah. Kansas, another problem I think drives the large property tax burden. Looking at the total number of local government units in our state compared to Utah, we're 5 times, 6 times the number of local government entities, special districts. It's pretty incredible seeing how much local government the state of Kansas has, and that's a lot to maintain in terms of accountability. I think having one notice for this, the Truth in Taxation hearing, even for those entities that are not included in the bill as it's written right now, whether it's school districts or whatnot. The Shawnee County Library is mentioned. Living in Shawnee County, having a library that has a $14 million budget that's approved to increase mill rates by a board that is unelected. They're appointed from our local government officials. There's a little stronger than just a tiny bit of a disconnect to the taxpayer. And I think having more transparency and accountability for those entities as well is important. So I think the big concerns that were voiced last year, I think Senator Tyson did a great job working out a lot of the concerns that were there. We would encourage the immediate effective date of this. I think in our effort to show true willingness to compromise and find a better solution. We've listened to the concerns from public sector representatives, and that was an amendment made last year by eliminating the tax lid in exchange for this. So if the tax lid's not working, we want to have something better in place, and we believe that this is a reasonable solution. It's been tested for decades in the state of Utah. That is known to have a taxpayer-friendly environment, but also a pro-growth environment. Utah's quickly becoming one of the faster-growing states in the country, I think because a lot of the things that they've put in place in terms of policy. So that would conclude my testimony, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate the opportunity to speak before you today, and I am happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Stafford. Our next conferee is Daniel Murray with the National Federation of Independent Businesses. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Dan Murray. I'm the Kansas State Director for the National Federation of Independent Business. NFIB is the state's leading voice for small business. We represent over 4,000 small business owners of all types of taxpayers across this state. I'll keep it simple. I was in the Army and they told me the KISS principle, which was keep it simple, stupid. Property taxes bad, transparency, and civic engagement good. And we think this bill provides that common sense framework for that to occur. I want to point out in my brief testimony written that taxes remain a huge problem for small business owners, as you might imagine. We, every 4 years, survey our members across the country and in Kansas and ask them, what are your biggest problems and priorities? Out of the 75 issues that they rank, 4 of the top 10 were tax-related. Not only tax rates, but also tax complexity. I do want to point out in 2020, our latest survey of small business owners, property tax rates jumped from 8th to 4th in terms of the highest problem and priority. We think that this bill will help to alleviate those concerns, will give small business owners the notification and the opportunity to engage and work with their local municipalities to ensure that the property taxes remain at the reasonable level. We want the products or we want the services that the property taxes fund, but we want to have a say at the table. We want to have an opportunity to review those rates, and certainly believe this bill does that in an appropriate way. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Our next conferee is Mark Toome with the Kansas Association of Realtors. Welcome to committee, Mark.
Chairman Smith, members of the House Tax Committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to provide testimony today on behalf of the Kansas Association of Realtors. I will also be brief, but realtors certainly believe that real estate is burdened with an excessive share of the constantly increasing costs of state and local government, and certainly more should be done to make that property tax process more accountable and transparent, and I think this bill does that. And while realtors were certainly supportive of the property tax lid concept, we were some of the bigger supporters of that, we also recognize that this legislation may actually do more and be more effective at giving citizens a voice in those decisions impacting their property tax burden. So we'd also like to indicate our support for the county treasurers establishing payment plans. We think that's a long overdue flexibility for property taxes, and that hasn't been mentioned too much, but I would definitely want to show our support for that provision. But we would certainly request that the House Tax Committee act favorably on Senate Bill 13 and be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mark. Our next conferee is Jason Watkins with the Wichita Regional Chamber of Commerce. Jason, welcome to committee.
Mr. Chairman, Jason Watkins on behalf of the Wichita Regional Chamber of Commerce. I'll also be brief. The Chamber does stand in support of this legislation. We think it's a positive step forward in trying to help property taxpayers understand property taxes. Currently, I think the information received is confusing. It's hard to understand. You often hear questions about where does the money go? If I haven't made any improvements to my property and there hasn't been a tax increase, why am I paying more this year than I paid last year? So we think that this transparency bill is a positive step forward and is demonstrated in Tennessee and Utah. It does pull the curtain back and allows the public to see what actions are being taken by those that they elect. That's a positive thing. Finally, I want to say the Chamber wants to be clear. We appreciate and support our partners in local government. They play a critical role in all of our communities. Everybody wants safe streets. We want way of life. Can't think of the appropriate term here. Somebody help me. Quality of life, that's it. Good quality of life amenities and good economic development. We think this legislation strikes a fair balance in accountability and transparency while also allowing local government to fulfill their critical mission to the folks that they serve. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we would ask that when you report this bill favorable for passage, and I'm happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time, and thank you for the help on the terminology.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. Our final verbal conferee on proponent testimony is Jim Howell with the Board of County Commissioners, Sedgwick County, Kansas. Mr. Howell, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I really appreciate the chance to be in front of you today. I actually love this place. I was a legislator and sat in these chairs between the years of 2011 and 2014. And during that time, I helped push forward the truth in taxation legislation in 2013. And on top of that, I actually appreciate Senator Tyson. I actually testified in favor of this legislation last year. In 2015, I testified in favor of the tax lid legislation. In fact, in 2016, Sedgwick County came and provided some technical amendments to the 2015 law in 2016, making that tax lid legislation workable. So Sedgwick County has a good history. I have a personal good history with this type of legislation. Today, I come before you as a member of our commission. The commission is actually behind my testimony today. We are proponents of this bill. We understand the nut of this bill, and we support it. Transparency and accountability, a roll call vote of the elected officials that make decisions regarding taxes and budget. That's good legislation, and we support that. I come to you as a proponent, but I do want to I guess I wonder where my colleagues are. Other governing bodies, I suppose, will be here when they do the opponent testimony. But I think I want you to hopefully hear me as a proponent, but I do want to ask for a couple of considerations. There's some minor adjustments or maybe friendly amendments if you want to think of it that way. We do think, since we are already in the 2021 budget cycle, that to implement this process in the middle of our current budget year that requires software and people and website potentially and processes and procedures with a budget that doesn't afford those types of activities and things is a problem for the 2021 budget. So we would ask for a change that would implement this in the following year. I think that's reasonable. We're not against the legislation. We want to support it, but we think that this is not the right year. I know there may be some concerns about governing bodies just jacking their taxes up this year. And to the extent, let me just remind you, we do have a tax lid. If you want to play with the calculations of the cap on the tax lid, that may be a way to get there, to keep local units of government from doing that. I would also point out this is retroactive. We are, as I said, we're already working on our 2022 budget cycle. We have to adopt that budget in August of this year. So if this passes, I assume it would go into place on July 1st. It gives us about 5 weeks to respond to this legislation. I feel like that's a problem. I have two small tweaks to this. One of those would be, and I go back to my legislative days when you guys change the budget proposal as you go forward. You normally have about 10 or 12 hours where the revisers develop all the new sheets, the charts that you guys look at before you vote. We need some time after the public hearing to adjust our documentation before we vote as well. I would argue that on page 3, line 13, the word is at that's currently on that line. I'd change that to word after. Let us, after the public hearing, we should vote. Now, I talked with Senator Tyson. God bless her. She's a great person. She explains that we could have more hearings. We can continue to vote after another chance for the public to speak. And then maybe that's the solution here. I want to make sure we're very clear that if we have our first public hearing and there's things that we need to change in our proposal, we have time to document that and reflow all of our entire plan, if you will, before we have to vote. And so voting after that process is important, and I think that's really what this bill is about, is accountability. We agree. I'm not sure that public hearing is necessarily the only chance to do that, so it's a point I would make. Also on page 3, line 35, there's a date there. It says September 20th. We've talked to our county clerks and other people in the entire budget process, and we would argue that the 20th is a bad date for us. We would prefer September 24th. So that's my third point. And then finally, my fourth point is this, and I'll end with this. We do want to notify our taxpayers. I think a lot of people are very happy accessing information online that they probably don't know about this opportunity. If we put this online, I would propose we would send a notification to every taxpayer, let them know that this information is available to you online. It's very robust. It's got a lot of information. We can explain your taxes entirely. But a generic postcard that's not property specific would be a fraction of the cost. We estimate this will cost Sedgwick County $150,000 to do the mailing that is suggested in the bill. I would suggest that these taxpayers would like to opt in to a detailed mailing. But let's start out with a postcard. I would suggest 2 or 3 years of notifying the taxpayers, encourage them to opt in to a detailed mailing if they want that, or call a phone number to opt in, or subsequently opt out of that detailed mailing. I think the reality is the vast majority of taxpayers would be very happy to do this online if they just knew about it. So I want to notify them, absolutely. But I don't want to spend $150,000 to do that if I don't have to. And with that, I just want to say we thank you for the chance to speak. I think this overall is very good legislation. I want Karen Tyson, the legislature, to be successful. We support this bill. I'd rather not make technical adjustments later. I'd rather do it right the first time. Unlike the changes we had to make in 2016 on the tax lid, I'd like to just make these suggestions before you pass this bill the first time. Thank you so much for your time, for the chance to speak, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Howell. Committee, I would like to also address your attention to proponent written testimony. You should have available from Elizabeth Patton, Americans for Prosperity, also John Donnelly with the Kansas Farm Bureau, and Justin Knopf and Taylor Williamson with the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. That is all I have listed. Are there any other conferees wishing to appear as proponents for Senate Bill 13? Seeing none, we will close the proponent portion of our testimony and open it up for questions for the proponents. Committee, if you want to ask a question, please identify the conferee you would like to address and then ask your question. First on my list, I had Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, little history about myself. I came out of the supermarket industry, and I lived in one of those little towns, and I owned my supermarket. And in 1988, when the Kansas Legislature decided to change the property tax laws and go to a tiered system, I predicted that this is exactly where we would be. And it took 30 years, and we're there. We have pretty well emptied out rural Kansas. Definite winners and losers were chosen at that time, and the winners have won big, and the losers are gone. So I have a couple of observations to make here on this bill, if you give me a little liberty. Nobody likes to pay property tax. It's kind of like sales tax, where we started before in 1988 to where it's escalated to now. It's not acceptable. The reason is because of a declining population in the rural areas. The folks who live in Johnson County, and I have some dear friends and relatives that live up there, their property tax bill is less than a third of what mine is. So I hear what they're saying. I can't feel their pain. A commercial building in 1991 in Council Grove ran $43,000. And everybody thought it was great because I paid it. Those rich business guys, we soaked them. And it worked. You know, we're all gone now. It's nothing but empty buildings and coffee shops. So that's a real problem. That's one of the core problems. But, you know, it's a matter of transparency. We need to see where the dollars are going. That's certainly to be done. And with the amendment, I spoke to my fellow retail grocers that are left yesterday with Kansas food dealers, and they have now got new competition in their market, and it's not from Amazon, and it's not from Dollar General, Casey's, or any of those people. It's from harvesters. And harvesters comes around to all these communities, gets all the publicity from the television stations, doesn't cost them anything, and they give their food away for free, no qualifications. Even people like me can go get a box of food. And they're done. Those grocers said, if they've got to compete against these guys, they don't want to pay property tax either. So I'm not sure where we want to go with all these things, but property tax is a problem. I'm certainly going to support this bill. I think it's a step in the right direction. There's some tweaks that need to be made, and we'll figure that out. But this property tax issue is not going to go away, and we're going to have to work on it in the future. So with that, I'll get off my pedestal. Thank you.
Representative, was there a question you wanted addressed from the conferees?
We don't have that much time. Thank you.
Okay, Representative Hyland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is for Mr. Murray, if he's still in the room.
Representative Dan Murray had to run to a Senate committee meeting, so he is not available.
Send him my questions.
Do you pass then, or do you want to inquire of another member?
No, it was specifically for him. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Awerkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you will, Mr. Howell, on one of your points, the September 20th, 24th, I'm also on a little city council, and we do our budgets right in the summertime, and we're trying to anticipate where our ending balances are going to be. Do you know why is it possible all the actions from the county clerks after that deadline to the end of the year, I'm going to assume, would it be possible just to move that date farther out, maybe October or even beyond that? Any thoughts on that, sir?
Thank you for that question. I understand that if we remove that date even further to the right, it actually causes compression on things that have to happen after this. So I would say the clerks would love that at a later date, no question. But I think then the treasurer might be not happy about the compression that they would they would receive after that as well. So there's other things that have to happen after this date. And unfortunately, I think if you shift this date too far to the right, it causes other problems as well. So this is kind of the balance or the compromise between those different entities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Howell, if you want to stay up there, I did have a question for you as well, and I'll try to be efficient by not making you take your seat. Section 4, when you're talked about having the vote after the hearing, the vote still has to happen before you can adopt the budget. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That's true.
So as long as that vote is held and that resolution as a county or an ordinance as a city, as long as that vote is held prior to adopting the budget, that would still be within the purview. Is that your opinion?
That is true. Thank you for the question. The way that the bill draft is written currently, it says that the vote must happen at the public hearing. And I think that I understand the point of that is we want to make sure that the people who are in the room can watch their elected representatives and look at them in the eye and see what they do when they vote for that tax increase or that proposed tax increase. That eye connection is, I think, what we're after here. But the reality is, these governing, the elected officials, when they vote, no matter when it happens, it is a roll call vote. And if I was going to point out in a future campaign against this person, I would say they raised taxes. Here's a recorded vote where they did that. To me, the record is the important thing here, not so much when that vote happens. Obviously, it has to happen after the public hearing. The question is, does it need to happen at the conclusion of the public hearing, or can it happen at some later date during the budget adoption process, or should sometimes you actually define how much money you're going to take from property taxes? That's the vote we're talking about. The budget still hasn't been adopted yet. That's a subsequent vote. But the reality is, whether it happens at the public hearing or at some point between, I should say, during that entire process, I think to me, that's the most important part here, is accountability. The roll call vote makes that happen.
So I'm a hypothetical guy. So I'm sitting here, I'm a county commissioner. We have this vote at the hearing. Can you explain to me what the process would then be if that vote failed? If enough taxpayers came forward and convinced commissioners, a majority of the commissioners, to vote down that increase, where would you go from there as a county commission?
That's a tremendous question. I think at that point, we would have to work with our budget creation staff, and that they would have to understand that the dollars are limited to what last year's revenue. We'll have to come up with a budget that fits within last year's revenue. And so from the time that vote happens until the budget is adopted, we have different constraints at that point. We would have to redevelop our budget around that maximum number. Yeah.
Committee, any further questions for any of the proponent conferees? If not, I did have another question. If Mr. Trobert would be willing to stand for a question?
Certainly.
Thank you. Kansas Policy Institute does a tremendous amount of data collection. It's amazing what you guys can do and pull down through the numbers. And I'm curious, you stated several examples of increases, drastic increases in property taxes. And I understand there's always a little bit of discernment that is needed, because you can hold the mill levy the same, but if assessed valuation goes up, obviously the budgeted dollars can go up. You can claim that you've held it the same, but you're not talking apples and you're talking apples and oranges, because mill levies don't constitute budget dollars. And I'm just curious, have you ever done any analysis on those counties that have seen significant increases, and what happens to those elected officials? Is there turnover, a large turnover in elected officials when that happens, either at the city or the county level?
We've not done that analysis.
Okay. And I also wanted to ask, when I looked at this, I pulled up my own personal tax bill, and I tried to recreate what a notification would look like to me. And in my tax bill, of course, I'm from a small rural county. My county, my city, and my school are 96% of my tax levy. Is that consistent throughout the state? Are there other entities that take up a large percentage of the mill levy?
That would be pretty consistent, but there are different ones. Johnson County, for example, has a separate mill levy for parks and a separate mill levy for libraries. In addition to so there are some variances, and you may have more fire, you may have a fire district, or you may not. There can be some differences.
Okay, and I guess where I was kind of leading with this is I'm trying to prevent some unintended consequences. And if my city, schools are already exempt out of this bill, so if my city and my county actually held at the revenue neutral rate and did not raise taxes, but I've got a township here, I've got a fire district that both levy less than 1 mil, would those entities be solely responsible for footing the bill for the postage and printing?
I don't have the answer to that question. I'll have to check and get back to you on that.
Well, what I'm looking at here is I'm looking at in proportion to the budget. Now, the way it looks, Senate Bill 13, as it came over from the Senate, that cost is supposed to be shared equally among the entities. But I'm just worried about the taxpayers for those smaller districts that have a very small budget compared to the city and county and schools. If they had to pay for all of the postage and printing, it seems like it would be a tremendous burden. It might be 10–15% of their budget just for that. And of course, as we all know, there's no government dollars, it's all taxpayer dollars.
The solution to that, and I don't mean to be glib, don't raise the property tax. I mean, it could be, honestly, it could be if they want to raise their property tax 5%, they may end up spending more than that giving out the notice. So they may just want to choose not to. And that's one of the reasons behind this bill, is that it hopefully will cause all local government entities to really closely look at their budgets. And we all do the same thing, individuals and businesses. We have some things, I might spend some money on something that I think is essential, and my wife would have a different opinion. And so when it comes down to how much are we really going to have to be honest and tell the taxpayers, they might look a little bit closer. There's also an exemption, I believe, in the bill for really tiny entities that have less than, I think, $5,000. Is that still in there?
That provision was taken out.
Oh, okay. That was in last year. Sorry, that was one of the little ones. But if you know, that's another way that they could be exempt from that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Committee, any further questions for the proponents? Yes, Representative Corbett.
Thank you, Chairman. One of the questions I have for Dave, if they do a mill levy increase, and I've been told by some people who've had some pretty good mill increases, and that they went to appeal their situation, and they've been told you cannot appeal a mill levy increase, only an evaluation. Is that true? If you're like on a tax increase on a piece of property, if it's not an appraisal, but just a mill levy increase, one of my constituents was told there's no appeal process for a mill levy increase.
I think that's true. I don't believe there is an appeal process for a mill rate increase, just evaluation.
Yes, Representative Gardner.
Thanks, Mr. Trobert. Thanks for being here. I'm going to shift gears just briefly and talk a little bit about another section of the bill, which deals with, added some language on appraisals, appraising. And in your testimony, you say this bill does not affect or change how property is appraised. Correct?
It's not changing the appraisal system.
Right. That's my question, I guess, is why would you be opposed to eliminate that language in the bill if it's not changing the appraisal process at all? You know what language I'm talking about specific?
No, I'm actually not clear.
Okay. I don't know where it's, it was added from another Senate bill that passed the Senate last year, and it was incorporated in this bill.
I believe you're talking about section 2 on page 4, lines 18 through 23, about the evaluation of real property,
right?
Normal repair, replacement, and maintenance.
Oh, okay.
That section.
All right. So you're asking if we would be willing to take out the clause about not raising valuations for routine maintenance?
Routine maintenance, et cetera.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I understand what you're getting at, I think. There are people who testified last year that they aren't supposed to do it, but taxpayers certainly believe that that's done. That was, as Senator Tyson said, that was one of the biggest complaints from across the state. And so the reason that that's there is to at least clarify that that cannot be done.
Okay. I guess I'm a little confused from the standpoint, the appraisers who appraise the property, they say it's not going to change anything that they do differently than today. So
the taxpayers don't believe that. Because, again, Representative, we've been had dozens, if not hundreds, of complaints over the years on that very subject. I mean, and it's very specific. I only did this. I painted my fence. I fixed my roof or something, and I get this big increase on my appraisal. And you know, this may be a case where both parties are right, because an appraiser may not be consciously doing it, but if your house was one that wasn't actually physically appraised that year, then it could be happening inadvertently.
okay. Thank you.
Committee, further questions? I try to keep remembering to look at WebEx also. I do not see any questions on WebEx, so we will close the proponent portion of our testimony and we will open it up for neutral testimony. I have on our sheet our first proponent, or first neutral testimony, Jay Hall, representing the Kansas Association of Counties. He will be joining us virtually. Jay, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Go ahead, sir.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. You have my testimony there with you, so I will not spend a lot of time. I don't want to go back through reciting all of my testimony. I think the main thing that I would like to address, however, is our request, and you'll see that about halfway down the second page of my testimony, about the amendment that we are requesting. And the reason we're requesting this amendment, as Commissioner Howell said, is simply because we're already into our 2021 budget, and we're already into that process. I know a lot of our counties actually start their budgeting process here in January, and I think even the latest counties start their budgeting process in March. So we're already into that process of going through the budget, and to implement these changes after we've already started that process would be very difficult. To address some of the concerns that were brought to the committee earlier, we don't want to go into this in bad faith. And so what we are requesting is not only to push back the timing for implementing this new process, but also to keep the tax lid in place while we are implementing this new process. So we would push back eliminating the tax lid to 2022, as well as pushing back implementing the new process until 2022. And again, that's just as a show of good faith that we are not trying to poison this bill or destroy this bill in any way. We are rather trying to make this bill workable. And the most important thing with that is making it workable by addressing those issues. I do want to address a couple of other things that have come up, and one of those is the reason that we would like to push that date back is because even if counties were to decide not to raise taxes here in 2021, in the 2021-22 budget year, that doesn't mean that we would not have to send out any notices. Under this bill, county clerks are responsible for sending out the notices for all taxing entities. And so that means even if the county itself does not raise taxes, if a city or an extension district or a fire district or a hospital district or a community college or any other district within that county, or any other district that spans multiple counties, if any of those districts were to raise their revenue, raise their taxes above the revenue neutral rate, the county would have to send that information out. And if our software at the county level is not prepared to send that out, our county clerks would be in violation of the law, and that simply is not something that I can stand by and not bring to the committee's attention. And so it's very important to us that we make this bill workable, make it so that our county clerks can follow the law appropriately by implementing this when it needs to be implemented. And simply put, if it's supposed to be implemented in 2021, it would be extremely difficult for our county clerks to do that in the 2021 year because we don't have control over all of those other entities' budgets. I was working on, and you may hear the county clerks that are going to testify later, I was working on trying to pull together some numbers of what it would cost to do all of the mailings, and we're up to about $500,000 with about half of the counties in so far. And I will tell you, we did not have Sedgwick County's information in. If I added that in, we'd be at about $628,000. If we added what Chairman or Commissioner Howell mentioned earlier, we'd be at about $628,000 in the total cost for mailing, and that still wouldn't include Johnson. I don't think Shawnee County's numbers are in here, and some of the other larger counties have also not gotten me their numbers yet, but we're still working on that information. I don't want to belabor any of the other points because I don't want to take too much time with you. I will finish by saying I do lay out the process for the budgets at the county level within my testimony. I would encourage everyone to read that because that budget process is already very transparent. We hold those hearings every year at the county level, and I'd encourage any of you as legislators, if you're interested in that process, to visit with your local counties, and they can walk you through that process and even get you the schedule for those budget hearings. And with that, I would stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I appreciate that. Our second neutral testimony is with, and I apologize, I will not pronounce this correctly, but Rick Pifo, Harvey County Clerk and Election Officer. Are you with us, sir?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I've submitted written testimony. I'm not going to read through it. I'll hit some of the high points. Some of this, we fully support transparency, but we see some issues with, or we would suggest an amendment to change the implementation dates from 2021 to 2022, just because of the difficulties of implementing this. Like Jay said, if any entity were to raise their budget even by a penny, we're going to have to send out a notice for that entity. So we need to have all the infrastructure in place to be able to send out that notice. And we have to actually start the process in in June when we first send out the budget worksheets to all the entities. We're going to have to calculate that revenue neutral rate and include it on that budget worksheet. And then we have to have the notice formatted, template, everything, because there's a lot of complex calculations that have to go into to create that notice. I mean, it's similar to a tax statement, but it's got more information. There's some new fields. There's a lot of information there. And I have had conversations with the largest software vendor, it was mentioned, and they haven't really prepared an estimate, and they won't start working on adjusting the software until legislation is in place. I mean, because they don't know what the final version is going to be or what the final specifications will be. Like Jay talked about, we've tried to get estimates. We came up with an average of about a little over $11,000 per county average, which comes out to a total cost of about $1.2 million to send out notices. That's if you had to send out notices to everybody, just like you do a tax statement. One thing that's not in my testimony is I would suggest, or we would like to suggest, that the time for the hearing to be conducted, it says that it has to be conducted on or before September 10th, but it doesn't have a beginning date. Potentially somebody could tell me, and that the entities have to tell me by July 15th that they are going to exceed their rate and are going to need a notice. And then we have to send that out 10 days before the hearing. They could potentially tell me, say on July 5th, that they're going to have a hearing on the 20th. So I would have to send out the notice for that entity before I even know from all the other entities. So potentially we could end up having to create multiple notices mailed out and not be able to really do a combined notice. So I would suggest maybe giving like a 1 month or 3 week time frame, backing up from September 10th or whatever that last date of hearing is. I would like to mention, we would like to move the implementation of this to next year, just so that it's possible that we could get the vendors to really rush this through, but I'm afraid we might not end up with what we really would like to have. And there could be some issues with it. So to ensure successful implementation and meeting the intent of the bill, I would suggest we move it to next year. There was one question about moving the budget submission from September 20th to September 24th or clear into October. I'd just like to remind you that we have to take in all the budgets, get the final valuations, calculate the mill levies, calculate the taxes for every property, add all the specials. The county clerk's office actually generates and calculates the tax statement and then delivers it to the treasurer, and we have to have it to the treasurer by November 1. So pushing that date further back would make it much more difficult for us to get that done. I mean, we're already moving it from right now, we get them on August 25th, and we have to have it by November 1. So I think those were my main topics, and I'd be happy to stand for questions when the time's appropriate.
Okay, thank you, Rick. If you'll stay around, we'll see if there's any questions after the neutral testimony. Next, I have Trey Calking with League of Kansas Municipalities, who decided to join us in person today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having us here today. I want to thank Senator Tyson. This is not a bad concept. It really is not, especially with all the work that's been done with it. We think transparency is a good thing. When we had conversations over the summer, our members told us time and time again when they actually went out and increased the mill levy and had those conversations, people saw what was going on in their communities and shook their heads and said, okay, our police officers do need a raise. So we think having those conversations is a good thing. We think sunsetting the tax lid is good. Everybody here has said the tax lid has not worked. Let's get rid of it. Let's put that local control that we value here in Kansas back into the hands of locally elected officials. This bill is fundamentally different than the bill from last year. First of all is the consolidated statements. That was something that we talked about last year. That is huge for us. Next, everybody is included in those statements. School district, the state. That is a big change from last year. That is very important to us. Next change from last year is there's guardrails on cost, which was huge for us. We need to know how much these are going to cost, what this looks like. That was put into place with the bill in front of you today. The other thing that has been cleared up for us, we had real concerns with the refund provision. But our understanding, and I want to say it out loud, is that if the tax neutral rate given to a city is 20 mills, if the city goes through the truth and taxation hearing, that's fine. They can set it whatever they published or less. If they decide to stay at that tax neutral rate of 20 mills, they're fine. That is the safe harbor. They're fine. They don't have to worry about the refunds. However, if for some reason they're told it's 20 mills and they levy 21 mills without going through the process, they owe a refund. That's fine. That's fair. We get that. So I just want to state that out loud because that's how we understand this process works. So, if somebody tells me I'm wrong, talk to me, but we're okay with the refund provision if I'm understanding it right today. We really think there's a path to get us all on the same page on this. For us, everybody has talked about a little portion of the timing. July 15th creates a lot of heartburn for us, having to have that to the county clerk by July 15th. We miss an entire additional month of sales tax estimates, or sales tax receipts. Right now it's August 5th, so we would really urge the committee to find us 15 more days, moving July 15th to August 1. The one thing I will point out that has not been talked about at all, in Kansas, property tax is due on December 20th. It's due on December 31st in Oklahoma, Missouri, Nebraska. Can we move that 11 days back and create a little bit more time that everybody's trying to find right here? And it works out for the property tax payer better by giving them 11 more days to pay property tax. So that is someplace we want to have a conversation on. Distribution of the cost. We don't think it is entirely clear in the bill how costs are distributed. We'd like to flesh that out a little bit. And then we're concerned about the implementation date. We're really relying on our county cohorts to tell us that they can or can't do it. To me, it's a technical problem. We stand ready to implement it today. We stand ready to implement it next year. We just want something when it works for it to be implemented right. Getting it right is key to us. So we would ask for that delay so that when it goes into effect, it does work. And I will tell you, the tax lid's still here. And I will tell you, for our elected officials who have felt that they've had to take the CPI increase, they won't have to take that this year because they know that the tax lid is going away in 2022. The Kelly piece of this, allowing property taxpayers to make payments, our governing body has supported that. We love that piece. That is a great piece of this bill. So we're glad to see it is included. And then the last thing I want to talk about, and I included in my testimony, is you can see how much our 30 largest cities in the state spend on public safety, and that often is more than what they collect in property tax regardless. We're spending our money on public safety. That is the most expensive thing we do. It is often 50–60% of budgets is public safety. So if you want to reduce cost, if you want to get taxes down, how do we address public safety is our question to you guys at the end of the day. I will stand for questions when it's appropriate. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I do have one neutral written that has changed to a virtual testimony. Sarah Kaler, Mayor of Ottawa, are you with us?
I am actually with you. Good afternoon, Chair Smith and committee members. Greetings from Ottawa. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. I recognize that it is 5 o'clock and you never want to be between somebody and 5 o'clock, so I'm sorry. I'm going to give you a really short little snippet from the city of Ottawa. I want to thank Representative Baker's comment about nobody likes to pay taxes. I don't like to pay them, and I'm an elected official, and I voted on budgets year after year. I don't like to pay them, but I recognize that they are necessary. I also appreciate that Jay brought up the highlight of the budgeting process. I'm not really sure that the budgeting process that has been painted to you today is actually the budgeting process that we're using in the city of Ottawa, and I'd be happy to talk to you about that at a later date. I applaud my senator, Senator Tyson, for removing the tax lid. So thank you, Senator Tyson, and I've told her that personally, how much I appreciate her including that in this bill. My concern, and there are a few listed there on my testimony today, my one concern that I want to address today with the group is that growth is not considered in this bill. We have recently developed a 300+ acre business development park that's on I-35. When businesses choose to come to Ottawa, and they will, and they'll locate here, our city, our county, and our local taxing subdivisions will not be able to capture that growth with this bill. When we grow, we just can't capture it. However, the state and the school districts still can capture it. So if we're going to have, let's everybody capture it or everybody doesn't capture it. Let's make it completely transparent for everyone. I would proffer that, you know, I don't know an elected official, one, that doesn't want to be completely honest with you, me included. I will stand for any of your questions, but I want you to know that municipalities like the city of Ottawa, we recognize the positive nature of this bill. As the mayor, I appreciate all the good work that Senator Tyson did on this bill, and I believe that with just a few changes, this bill provides us a unique opportunity for cities and other municipalities, counties, and the state legislature to actually work together in harmony. Considering the political tense nature that there is right now out in the world, I think that we, all as Kansas, have an opportunity to kind of set an example of how we can work hand to hand together on behalf of all Kansas citizens. I'll stand for questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. We appreciate that. That concludes our oral testimony. Are there any other neutral oral conferees? If not, I'd like to draw your attention to a multitude of written testimony for neutral. And at this time, committee, I'd open it up for questions for our neutral conferees. Representative Day.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question. I'm not sure if it's, it might just best be answered by Trey, if is he still here? I'm just wondering, how are cities and counties supposed to fund services if property taxes are stifled by the actions of what we're doing here today? Just out of, and beyond that, like Rick Pifo, I think you pronounced his last name, of the KCCEOA, made a great point in his testimony that when we as a legislature call for changes, like the notices to residents requirement, the county taxpayers are the ones who pick up that bill, in essence. So can you just help me understand?
I personally think what this bill does is just that. It is a cost to taxpayers to give them transparency every year on what's going on. I will say, I think the Utah model was great with the growth component to it because it created a target. It said, if you stay under this, you don't have to send these notices. 0 is fundamentally not a target. Our costs go up every year, and because we deal with American employees, American made, our costs go up higher than CPI. That's why, because we're dealing with 100%. You can't buy a Chinese blacktop. Our blacktop comes from the United States. It's just how it works. So that's why our cost goes up higher than CPI every year. So I think this is a mandate to send notices. I think it will create conversations, which will be good, but I honestly do not think this is going to do what Utah does, because Utah had a good target, stay under this and you don't have to send the notices, and we don't have that in Kansas.
I appreciate that, and I plan on looking into that a little bit more. And I am a fan of transparency. I think all of us here are proponents of transparency, so thank you so much for your help with that.
Next on the list is Representative Hyland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for you also. I looked at your spreadsheets that you provided with your testimony, and it's dramatic. Explain to me how these counties are getting by if their public safety and all that is well over 100% of the property tax.
These are cities, so it's, you know, sales tax and it's fees that pay for it. I mean, that's when you exceed property tax, that's why, you know, sales tax and fees.
But if on the safety portion of it, how much of it is of their total budget, then, you know, this was dramatic, I understand that, but.
Typically, you know, it is between 50 and 65% on normal is what public safety makes up of it. I will tell you, suburbs, Lenexa, Andover, it's less, which surprised me. But, you know, Topeka, you have more police officers than you do in Lenexa, Andover, just the nature of an urban versus rural city.
Thank you.
Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure, I probably should ask this question early on, but when it says governing body, and Representative Kelly and I happen to live in a county that has the distinction of having 2 community colleges in one county, and that's about 40 mills for each one. If they decide to raise the trustees of the college, are they considered the governing body who would be responsible for the meeting and notifying the county clerk to mail that out? Am I understanding that correctly?
I might defer to the reviser on this, but it's my understanding that whoever controls the budget, whoever has the authority to pass the budget, is the governing body, and they would be the ones responsible. Adam Siebers, is that correct, or are community colleges handled any differently?
You know, my first assumption is that would be correct. I'll have to take a look at that a little bit more to make sure I'm interpreting that correctly. But yes, since they generally would have the authority to levy the property tax, I would assume that, but I'll have to check into that a little further.
That actually kind of leads to a follow-up question. I just thought, and I guess this would be for anybody, I don't know if you would know, Trey or Jay Hall, are community colleges, are all entities, are they on the same fiscal year at the calendar year, or do they operate along the state? Because I could see a potential problem if a governing entity or tax entity had to adopt this timeline, but yet they didn't operate on the calendar fiscal year.
Community colleges, just from experience, they operate under that same August 25th deadline that everybody else does. Now, their fiscal year might be different, but as far as setting that mill levy, they've always operated under the same August 25th deadline to get that information to the county clerk, because they have to have that information for the tax statements. In Montgomery County, it would be the independents, the elected board of trustees for the community college for the northern half, and then the southern half would be the Coffeyville Community College with the two community colleges.
Next, I have Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for you, Trey. We heard a lot about Utah today. I'm just wondering if you could share what worked well in Utah, how that differs from what we're looking at here, absent, they have mountains and some other stuff we don't have.
So Utah, you actually look at the same period of time, property taxes grew more in Utah than they did in Kansas on a dollar for dollar basis in the last 30 years. Now, when you take in population growth, that's where the difference comes in. So if their population grew, so you can do some math there and you can say things are better in Utah. But why it has really worked in Utah has been the growth in Utah. Utah is a growing state. They have, let's be honest about Utah. Love Utah. Love that they have big families and move out and build houses, and it creates new growth. It's a great thing for Utah, and it's worked out well for them. And also having the target of new growth has worked out well. Now, I will tell you that in recent years, Utah has had more public hearings. They've had increased taxes more in recent years because what they found out that didn't work is you would have at first these hearings were so rare because they had the growth, and then when they would have the growth, or when they won, they would eat up their reserves, and then all of a sudden they would have to raise taxes 150%. That's ugly, and they would have ugly hearings. But what Utah found is, hey, if we just do, between 2% and 4% every year, people don't come out with the torches and pitchforks. So that has been what has shifted in Utah, is a lot more of them have gone to smaller increases than trying not to do increases. So that is conversations I've had with folks in Utah since this has been around.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, any further questions? I would like to ask Rick a question if he's still available.
I'm still here.
Okay, thank you, Rick. One of the provisions of the bill is to allow electronic notification. And I was curious, I'm from a small rural county. I would really like your perspective. Do you collect any email addresses? Do you have any type of interaction electronically with your taxpayers at this point?
We don't currently. I suppose we could start capturing that. We capture some on election data, but I wouldn't transpose that to this. We'd have to start capturing that or find a way to capture it, capture when people visit our website or something. One thing if I could, I forgot to add was just a reminder to everyone that 101 out of 105 counties, the county clerk is also the election officer. And we already have to prepare the tax roll right before a November election. All of this is going to be right in the time frame of the August election. And I'm not opposed to more work, but just putting it out there that all this stacks up at the same time.
Thank you. Committee, any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. We will close the portion of the hearing for neutral testimony and move to the opponent testimony. I have one oral testimony via WebEx. Gail Santee, I hope I do not pronounce that incorrectly, with the Central Kansas Library System. Gail, are you with us?
Chairman, I am, and you did pronounce that correctly. Thank you.
Very good. Welcome to committee, Gail.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and honorable members of the committee, I have submitted written testimony, so I'm not going to spend a lot of your time after 5 o'clock. I have some concerns about Senate Bill 13 as it is written. Like those of us online and those in the room, I'm very much in support of truth and transparency in taxation and in government and in being a good steward of the tax dollars that we receive. But I'd like to bring to your attention that I feel that Senate Bill 13 misses the mark when it comes to regional library systems. Regional library systems, as Representative Clayton said, do fall under this Senate Bill 13. Regional library systems are not the same as local public libraries like the library in Goodland or Colby, or even the Topeka-Shawnee County Library with its $14 million budget. Regional library systems were enacted by statute. There are 7 across the state. They're multi-county taxing entities. Their charge by Kansas statute is to improve library service where it exists and offer library service where there is none. The regional systems were established in the 60s because those legislators had the foresight to know how important good library service was out in the rural counties as well as in the big towns. So regional library systems are governed by a full system board. That includes a member from each local public library board in the region, and it also includes a county appointee, which are appointed by the county commission. Most of those county appointees are rural taxpayers, and they represent those rural taxpayers in their county. The full system board meets annually to approve the budget. It's always a proposed budget, but all other business can be delegated to an executive board. On my executive board, I have 2 county commissioners, and we talk long and often about the impact to our rural taxpayers. By Kansas statute, the regional library systems annually post advance notice of the budget and the budget hearing in the largest newspaper in each of the taxing counties. That's getting harder and harder to do, actually, because some of those big newspapers publish once a week or even every other week. Regional library systems are funded by a mill levy on those properties so rural that they don't pay a local library tax. The rural taxpayers are the ones who fund the regional library systems. The mill levy for regional library systems across the state range anywhere from 1.998 to 1.218 mills, and all of those are a combination of the levy for the general fund and employee benefits. Now, I said that the systems were established by statute, and in statute, they are told what to do, but how that looks is different for every single region in Kansas. Libraries in northwestern Kansas have different needs than libraries in southeast Kansas. Rural patrons all want the same thing. They want good library service available to them, and they want their dollars well spent. Some regional library systems provide a service of rotating books that supplement the local library collection. I do that here at CKLS. We also provide digital ebooks and downloadable audiobooks to supplement those which are available through the state library. We do those through a number of different vendors. Those are very expensive. All regional library systems provide technology support, consulting at no cost, continuing education to public school and academic libraries, and direct financial aid to assist public libraries. We provide aid based on population and the size of the library. So of course, Salina Public Library is going to get more money from the regional system, from CKLS, Central Kansas Library System, than Randall, Kansas, which has 80 people in the town. And again, how those services play out vary from system to system. All of the regional library systems are very conscientious about the careful use of the dollars they receive from rural taxpayers. Here at the Central Kansas Library System, my predecessor heard that there was going to be a mill cap and he jacked up our levy. I've been here for 3 years, and each of those 3 years we have dropped our budget. This year alone, well, sorry, 2020. It is 2021 now. It still feels like it's March though. In 2020, we collected $92,504 less than we did in the previous year. We're also very mindful that we have more oil producing counties than the other systems, and that oil valuation could drop as much as 40% this year. We took that into account when we proposed our budget last year. And we're, again, levying less money because of that. We work for our rural taxpayers. So just as we're seeing a stable downward trend in total dollars taxed, the Central Kansas Library System is going to have to increase our mill levy just to fund that mailing notification requirement. I'm concerned about the costs to our rural residents because instead of the intent to decrease the individual tax burden, it's actually going to increase it. The only other option for us then would be cut financial aid to libraries. And that's something that we'll do as a last ditch effort. But when we do that, that means that all of the libraries in my system, 54 public, school libraries in 32 districts, they're going to receive less money from us. That means that they're going to have reduced hours. They're not going to be able to have as many high-speed, up-to-date computers to serve the public. And if you think, oh, everybody has a computer, I urge you to contact your local library and find out how many people use the public computers and what they use them for. They use them for local government. They use them to apply for employment and unemployment. They use them for insurance purposes. Sure, they search social media and things like that, but staying connected to others improves the quality of life. Public libraries are often the only place in these small rural towns that have free Wi-Fi, and they are the only place that has trained informational professionals to help point people in the direction of the information that they need. The notification requirement in Senate Bill 13, I feel, is going to place an unnecessary burden on our rural taxpayers as regards to regional library systems. Those tax dollars are already used to publish the budget and notice of the budget hearing each year. Our rural taxpayers should not have to bear the burden of that additional cost. And I would urge you, members of the House Taxation Committee, to consider a friendly amendment regarding regional library systems and the annual notification. This concludes my testimony. I am very happy to answer any questions you might have for me at the appropriate time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Gail. That is the only oral testimony I have. Is there anyone wishing to appear as an opponent to Senate Bill 13? If not, I would direct your attention to written testimony from William Black, City of Hayesville, and at this time open it up for questions for Gail. Committee, any questions? Representative Sanders.
Hi, Gail. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you quickly run through the numbers that you comprised for your 7 regional, what this is going to cost? Do you have those numbers handy?
I do. For us at CKLS, it would be about $8,000 if we were to increase our mill levy or go above what's called budget neutral in Senate Bill 13. That's the cost that we would bear if there is no one else to share that. Northwest Kansas Library System, the director there, George Seaman, estimates it would cost him about $5,000. And then, of course, Northeast Kansas Library System could be as much as $15,000 to $20,000 to publish that notice if there is no one else to share that cost.
Committee, any further questions? Seeing none, Gail, thank you for your testimony. That does conclude our opponent testimony, and we will close the hearing for Senate Bill 13. Committee, thank you very much for your patience and being willing to dive into the details on this bill so we can all make a good, informed, educated decision. We are adjourned.